London, 1903, St Mary's Hospital, Paddington. In spite of the enormous advances in preventing disease, up to now, patients like these, suffering serious local infections, have been incurable. But here they can consider themselves fortunate. An attempt is at last being made to treat them by Sir Almroth Wright, one of the few men at this time working on cures for disease, based not on dubious tradition, but on the most recent scientific advances.
Right, Bill, quick, forward!
It was work that had begun years earlier in the military atmosphere of the Army Medical School at Netley. At that time, Wright had been the civilian professor of pathology there. He'd become interested in vaccines after a visit by one of Pasteur's assistants. Using Pasteur's methods, he'd succeeded in producing a vaccine.
Ah, here you are. Lambs to the slaughter, eh? And you too, Douglas. Your bovine constitution continues to defy all comers. We shall see if it likes typhus.
Wright hoped he was to be the first man to introduce a mass immunization campaign.
Gentlemen, you are clear what this vaccine consists of. Is anyone having second thoughts? Yes, sir. Feel free to withdraw if you wish.
For such widespread use, these early trials on his own students had to be faultless.
How do you feel, Peter?
Pretty rough, sir.
Let me look at the area of the injection. It's inflamed.
Wright had expected a reaction, but nothing as serious as this. 8 out of the 11 volunteers were seriously affected. It took several days for them to recover, but it was found that they had developed a high resistance to typhoid. The Army, however, was seriously concerned about the side effects. To them, the prospect of every vaccinated soldier going sick for several days was almost as significant as the loss of life from epidemics. Yet, until there was a large-scale trial, Wright could not prove just how effective his treatment was.
If you read my paper, you'll see that we now give 2 injections. The first sufficiently mild to reduce any temporary ill effects to a minimum.
But ill effects there are.
Lasting not more than 24 hours at most.
During which time, if exposed to infection...
The whole point of inoculation is to do it before there's any chance of exposure to the disease. I'm not asking for this to be introduced throughout the entire British Army.
No, there's hardly sufficient grounds for that.
And there will not be until trials on a sufficiently large scale have demonstrated its value, which is what I am asking for. Compulsory inoculation for all troops embarking for India.
But of the men who left for overseas campaigns in 1899, only 4% had been inoculated. And from some ships, cases of vaccine were thrown overboard and returned by the Coast Guards to Wright at Netley. It had been with his progress thwarted in this direction that Wright had thought of exploiting his knowledge of vaccines in a different way. Instead of restricting their use to the period before infection took place, as prevention, he tried using them after the disease had taken hold, as a cure. Wright knew very well how to prepare the vaccines from samples of the infections, but that was all. The rest was hypothesis. For Wright, it was a gamble in which he was committing the best years of his working life.
Nature has her own way of dealing with infection. But in your case, the defenses in the blood just aren't strong enough. We must try to build them up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
But at the time when Wright was beginning treatment, another man, working in Frankfurt, was starting work on a theory for treatment which was revolutionary both in its concept and technique. Today, as on other days, he carries with him to work his dog, his cigars, and his idea, the man Paul Ehrlich, It was some years now since Ehrlich had at last left Koch in Berlin to direct his own institute in Frankfurt. The workers here, however, were concerned with a routine task, the testing of blood sera. So it was in his own small laboratory that Ehrlich had been developing the obsession he'd fostered for 20 years, the search for the ideal treatment of infection. A poison so specific that it would kill the invading germs, leaving other body tissues unharmed. Ehrlich's own rooms in the institute were filled with literally hundreds of chemicals, many of them dyes. It was among these that he was hoping to make the chance discovery of the specific poisons that he called magic bullets.
All right. All right. Oh, there you are. Here. Yeah. Kaput Pigerium. Cartwright, you've been tidying again. How many times have I told you?
But Dr. Cruz is visiting us today.
That's no reason to interfere with my papers.
He'll need somewhere to sit.
Morning, Professor.
Good morning, my dear Marquardt. Yes, oh, I had a letter from Cossell today. It says we never answered his last one.
It's probably in the urgent tray. Most things are that don't get answered.
Today, my dear Marquardt, we'll answer them all. A grand clear-out.
Good morning, Professor.
Ah, Dr. Shiga. Anything new?
Yes, sir. The guinea pig from Paris.
Oh, yes. Look, Marquardt, these pencils, they're much too short. Now, what were you saying, Dr. Shiga?
The guinea pig with the trypanosomiasis from the Institut Pasteur.
Wonderful, marvelous. What an ingenious fellow Monsieur Lavrin is. Come, Dr. Shiga. To work, to work. Here we are. Just put it there.
Dr. Cruz has arrived. Shall I tell the accordion player to stop?
Certainly not. I'm sure Dr. Cruz enjoys good music, too. Get him to give us the banks of the Spree. I've not heard that for weeks.
Dr. Cruz? If you'd care to come this way, the professor is expecting you. Dr. Cruz, Professor.
Oh, yes, Dr. Cruz. Yes, welcome, Doctor. You call at a happy time. Come and see what we've got under the microscope. Come along, this way. There we are. There. You see it? That microbe with the long, wavy tail swimming about. That's the trypanosome parasite. The one that gives maldecaderas to horses. But that excellent Monsieur Lavron managed to transfer it to guinea pigs. So now we can study them in the laboratory. I've reason to believe it may be susceptible to benzopurpurin dyes, and if it is, it won't be just maldecaderas we'll learn how to cure. We'll come into the office, Dr. Cruz. Oh, where are my cuffs? Where are my cuffs?
Perhaps I can look first at the accounts, Dr. Ehrlich.
The accounts? Yes, certainly. Marquardt, the accounts?
The committee is worried about the expenditure here.
Yes, well, naturally, so am I. It's just not enough, Dr. Cruz. Now, Dr. Cruz, let me explain. Here we are. Piece of chalk. Corpora non agant nisi fixata. That means only anchored substances work. If you're to persuade the committee to increase my budget, you need to understand the side chain theory.
But I am here to reduce the budget.
Yes, yes. Now, here. Where is it? Yes, look, sit down, sit down. That's it. Now, that's it. Would you hold that for a moment, please? Now, here we have a cell. You know, understand? Now, it has affinity for certain chemical substances. Now, if these substances appear, a chemical binding takes place. It's as close and as well adjusted as that between a key and a lock. In most cases, this is fatal for the cell. Revere, in order to incorporate the nature of the chemical binding for the cell, will then be caught by the receptor, the catching arm, and thus become anchored to the cell protoplasm. Well, it will take months of experiment just to find a dye the trypanosomes will react with before we even come to its effect on animals. This means more chemicals, more animals, more staff. AO ipso Dr. Cruz, it means a lot more money.
2 rooms in a basement and £100 for equipment. That's all they gave me. For the pathology department of a leading London hospital.
It was in 1902 that Wright had resigned his post in the army and with one of his assistants, Stuart Douglas, had come to St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, where he was now Professor of Pathology.
No idea they've given you so little, sir. You certainly made it go a long way.
Good morning, Fiona.
Morning, Dad. Morning.
Well, naturally, I twisted their arms a bit.
I bet you did.
At least here, I'm relatively free from the excesses of the military mentality. But bullying the authorities shouldn't be necessary to get our resources. No wonder medicine is still in the dark ages.
Despite his grumbles, Wright had everything he needed to start practicing his vaccine therapy, the stimulation of the patient's own defenses to combat his infection. But first, in order to give just the right amount of vaccine, he had to find out how weak the natural defenses were. He took a sample of the patient's blood, then mixed it with bacteria from the patient's infection. He wanted to see how effective the white blood cells were in destroying the bacteria, and he estimated this by literally counting the number they absorbed. In a sick person, the number was small. In a healthy person, much larger. And the sicker the person was, the more vaccine was used. The results seemed good. The team only worked on local infections, but persistent boils disappeared, skin tuberculosis improved overnight.
Consistently fail to respond to treatment. Grateful if you try a vaccine.
You see how it seeks it out inexorably.
At the same time, Ehrlich had found a chemical, one of his dyes called benzopurpurin, which in the test tube stained his trypanosome parasite and killed it. It was possible to see them slow up and die.
Come to the biology section.
Professor, your lunch appointment.
Oh, yes. You know Margaret, my secretary.
Frau Ehrlich has come for you.
Ah, Edwin. I won't be long. Carl, I'd like you to meet...
Paul!
Yes, dear. I won't be long. In here. Carl. This is Dr. Shiga. We've tried most of the benzopurpurin series, but always the same result. Isn't it, Dr. Shiga?
We hold up death for 2 or 3 days, but no more.
Have you considered the arsenicals for this?
Oh, yes. We tried atoxyl.
But we get no results with it.
Yes, though Thomas and Brynell in England did. But perhaps we should try it again.
Yes, maybe you should.
Paul, we mustn't be late for Frau Speer.
My dear, I want you to meet Dr. Herxheimer of the State Hospital. How lucky we are to be in Frankfurt, where we've so many good friends to help us.
Yes, of course. But we must go.
Oh,
Your cuffs, Professor.
Oh, thank you, Carver.
Paul, look at your hands.
Oh.
You can't have luncheon with the wealthiest woman in Frankfurt with hands like that.
If she's as wealthy as you say, I dare say she has a wash basin. Carl. Now, we mustn't keep Frau Speer waiting. Oh, yes, sorry.
With Ehrlich's scientific problems growing ever more complex, their lunch appointment produced an agreeable surprise.
Yeah.
Their hostess, Frau Speer, was looking for a memorial for her husband, a banker, who died the previous year. A new institute for Ehrlich was one possibility.
It will cost a lot of money.
I have a lot of money.
What was your husband's name?
George. Why?
The George Speer Institute of Chemotherapy. Wonderful. Marvelous. Thank you. Now, at last, we shall begin to make progress.
For the new work this gift made possible, Ehrlich had to take on more staff. Dr. von Braun was in charge of the chemical laboratory. With him came Dr. Schmitz.
Yes, it's fine.
I'm keeping an eye on him.
Yes.
And a friend of Frau Speer, Dr. Bertheim.
Dr. Bertheim.
Yes.
From the beginning, there was conflict. Every day, regardless of their seniority, every worker received written instructions from Ehrlich for their day's work, known as blocks.
Thank you.
In spite of the increase in his staff, Ehrlich, still the lone researcher, refused to delegate responsibility.
Persistent strains resist not just one chemical agent, but the whole series. Confirmed by supplying Hunt with all trypan red derivatives and arrange experiments. Rats? What does he mean, rats?
It's absolutely impossible.
They don't even have any rats at the moment.
The frustrations amongst Ehrlich's staff were not helped by numerous experiments which had shown all the drugs so far to be ineffective. Unaware of these tensions, Ehrlich himself was now working on a new group of compounds containing arsenic. But even the most promising of these, atoxyl, was too potent. Ehrlich wanted to make it less poisonous, but according to an analysis of its formula, it was too stable to be changed. Then in a routine analytical test, Ehrlich obtained a totally unexpected result. This orange color meant that atoxyl was not stable.
What an incredible reaction.
It could give rise to thousands of derivatives, any one of which might have just the right properties.
I thought you tried atoxyl years ago.
Incredible. You know, I think atoxyl has been wrongly constituted. Basham made a major error.
Basham made
Good morning, sir.
Oh, good day, Von Braun.
Sir, this block you said...
My orders must always be carried out, Von Braun.
But the biology section don't have any rats at the moment. Dr. Hunt suggests we use mice instead.
Oh, no, no, rats. For injection purposes.
Why, sir?
Why? Rats have tails. We inject into the tail vein.
So, as it happens, do mice.
Of course. Of course. That's true. Mice have tails.
Rats, he says. Use rats because rats have tails.
What?
You know, since I came to this section, I've not made a single research decision. I'm given the same instructions as the lab boy.
That's how Basham said it was. A chemically indifferent analyte, EC split into its components. But I think not. I think it's stable.
Professor, Basham was a great chemist. It was 40 years ago he pronounced on atoxyl. If he'd been wrong, surely by now...
Derivatives can be drawn from it easily. The active site hasn't been blocked at all. The arsenic acid is on the other side.
But Basham wouldn't have neglected any possible...
Answer me this. How do you explain that incredible reaction if Basham was right?
Yes, well, but I can't.
Basham was clearly a needle and good for nothing. Now, I know I'm right. Now, I propose we work on this together on the most simple derivatives at first. Now, you cannot tell if I'm right or not. Just follow my instructions precisely.
No, I refuse.
Those are the professor's orders.
The man's mad. I mean, to take a classic formula like Basham and declare it's wrong.
He does seem to have a sound experimental basis for it. I've seen that for myself.
Yes, but I can interpret that reaction of his in several different ways.
Gentlemen. I cannot insist too strongly that in the making of these derivatives, my orders are carried out to the letter. You know? You understand?
We are not schoolboys, Professor. We are fully qualified chemists.
Are you arguing with me, sir?
No, but I would just like to be consulted occasionally, that's all.
To say atoxyl is capable of derivatives when you've only got to see from Basham...
impudent badger, sir.
What?
If you're not prepared to carry out my instructions without question, there's no place for you here.
Very well, we'll go.
Yes. Now. I'll collect my other things later.
If you want our resignation in writing, sir, you'll have it in the morning. Good day to you.
Dr. Brown, surely there's no need
Why
for
don't you go yourself, Dr. Bertheim? It was only for the sake of Frau Speer that I allowed any of you to be here. I like to choose my own staff.
I thought you wanted me to work on these derivatives.
If your colleagues feel as they do.
Then they are no longer colleagues of mine, Professor.
Very well, but no mistakes.
Ah, Fleming! You managed to find us then?
Every night, Wright's team of young assistants worked to the early hours preparing their vaccines.
Mr. Fleming, Captain Douglas.
You're the young man who did so brilliantly at medical school.
Yes. I thought you ought to see how we do things here, sir.
Their enormous enthusiasm had so far remained unaffected by mounting criticism that Wright's whole method was unscientific. This was a critical time for both Wright and Ehrlich. They'd been friends for some years, but in 1906 they met again at a celebration dinner in honor of Ehrlich, who'd come to London to lecture.
The future lies in chemotherapy, only because serum therapy is so limited.
But so far, Alec, you've not found a single substance.
What about syphilis? How could your vaccine therapy help there? Never. Tell me, what do you know about syphilis?
So far, I have never experienced it.
Sir Elmore. Talking of Sif.
What are they saying? My English isn't very good.
I suspect they're trying to change the subject. A discourtesy in conversation that puts them on a level with women. If they worked for you, Alec, you would call them all impudent badgers.
Yes, we are.
Rather.
Music. Listen, shh, listen.
Oh, it's the students upstairs.
Excellent. The green banks of the Spray. That's my favorite song. Oh, this I must hear. Look, could we persuade them to come down here to play for us?
It's painful enough to endure, I suppose. Real music I enjoy too much. It overwhelms my senses. The enjoyment of art is bad for the mind, like wine and women.
Some of my best ideas come to me when I'm listening to music.
Art is a whore to be enjoyed in youth but spurned in maturity.
There we differ. The older I get, the more I need the stimulus of addictions. As for your remarks about women, Von Wright, I know some very intelligent women.
Yeah.
My wife, for instance, and my secretary, and my two very clever daughters.
Fine gals.
Women are only intelligent insofar as they reflect the intelligence of their menfolk.
Come on, sir. You can't believe half these things you say.
Oh, I do indeed. The most unbelievable statement in the New Testament is that there were 10 virgins, 5 of whom were wise.
They'll be running the laboratory, sir, if the suffragettes have their way.
Then let's get back to it. Man the barricades. Our sex, at least, is capable of working, and a good deal better at that than dancing. A cup of tea, Professor.
Tea?
Oh, I'm afraid the laboratory is strictly teetotal, sir.
Oh, not for me.
For when the wine is in, the wit is out. Who said that, Freeman?
Sir Elmoth Wright. Who else?
Thomas Bacon, 1812 to 1867.
Wonderful. Marvelous. But how so? Phagocytes laid out in a line along the edge of the slide.
It facilitates counting. They are caught in a thin film of glycerine.
Such technical ingenuity. You know, work like this I find very satisfying. But tell me, the opsonins in the patient's blood, they prepare the invading bacteria for the white cells, who then devour them.
From the Greek opsono, to prepare food.
Yes, but you have very little idea of how it works.
Well, we do know for certain that there's something in the serum that affects the white cells.
But how do you know what's happening accurately enough to measure the opsonic index as precisely as you need?
Well, We think we can. Thus the technical intricacies.
Yeah. Then these vaccines, which you give to boost the phagocytic power. You have no precise idea how these work.
No, not really, but...
just that they seem to.
But, well, we've had such successful results.
Now, these vaccines, you don't know their chemical constitution?
No, but well, they're dead vaccine, anyhow.
It doesn't really matter.
Yes, but they could actually be dangerous.
Dangerous? But look at the results. You can't argue with them.
True, you've seen improvements registered over hundreds of cases of localized infections, boils, styes, and so on. But they will almost always clear up anyway.
You are suggesting that the system of treatment we have here is built on sand. You may be right. But it is possible that you are wrong. So we have little to lose. We continue to improve our technique, evaluate our findings, and at the same time, provide treatment. We've both seen enough suffering.
Well, your generalizations certainly are persuasive. I only hope that time looks on your efforts kindly.
But how did he contrive to injure his eye with a collar stud?
Well, he had had quite a bit to drink, sir. And as you say, when the wine was in, morning for him.
Morning. He didn't impair his faculties with us.
Oh, I don't know, sir. Some of the observations he made about our work.
If the doubts he was expressing about that were merely the results of an intoxicated mind, maybe it's time I took to drink myself. Well, what are we waiting for? Ask the first patient to come in.
On his return to Germany, it had been suggested to Ehrlich that his work with the trypanosome might have produced something which would be effective against another very similar organism, the newly discovered spirochete of syphilis. In the children's wards, the prematurely senile cases of congenital syphilis were a common sight. For the children, there was no treatment. For adults, the only effective treatment was mercury rubbed into the skin. The disease had epidemic proportions. In Germany, 6% of the population died from syphilis, and many more were affected. Yet it was still considered a punishment for sins, and cure was considered by many as an open encouragement to immorality. At the Speer house, Ehrlich's predictions about the structure of atoxyl had proved correct, and Bertheim's team were deriving large numbers of new substances from it. Well over 600 derivatives had been prepared, each one of which was sent for exhaustive tests in the biology lab. Ehrlich brought in a Japanese to do the tests from Kitasato's lab, Dr. Hata, an expert on syphilis. Each of the 600 compounds was tried against 3 or 4 different diseases. Each disease was tested in dozens of different animals. The sheer volume of work was enormous. Compound number 418 was promising at first, but the parasite later became immune to it. Then, one day in 1909, after 2 years' work, Hata came in with a report on his work.
Come in. Ah, my dear colleague. Well, anything new?
Only first trials. Only preliminary general review.
Oh, good. I'll read them most carefully.
606 efficacious.
606? Well, surely not. We had a totally negative result on that, if I remember rightly. No action whatsoever.
Very efficacious on syphilis in rabbit.
Surely you're mistaken.
I am not mistaken. First, I tried 606 on spirochetes of chickens. Very good results. Very promising. This rabbit, I gave syphilis disease last month. Many syphilis spirochetes can be seen. Soon they will all go, everyone, with one dose of 606.
One? You mean just one injection?
That one also. I gave syphilis last month. Last night, I gave 606. Today, no spirochetes.
Begarium.
It's truly a magnificent achievement, Paul.
Oh, thank you. I sent some to Alt. He tried it on dogs. Then two of his assistants volunteered. Now he's given it to some of his paralyzed patients who have already shown a marked improvement. And listen to this. From Iverson at Petersburg.
Paul, you don't need to convince me. But you must know that in the eyes of some people, anyone who catches syphilis deserves all he gets. And since in certain quarters you're somewhat resented anyway.
I am?
A lot of people had their eye on Frau Speer's fortune. If they're to learn how it's been used to cure syphilis, well, I'm only trying to warn you that if anything goes wrong, there are some powerful people in Frankfurt who'll delight in using it against you.
If they'd ever visit a syphilis ward...
Ah, but they don't. They don't like to think the disease exists.
We have 200 cases like this one. You'll find no mention of them in the published records. Syphilis? Of course not. Frankfurt's a respectable city. This man made us tell his wife that he was suffering from a serious skin disease. But she never comes to see him. She knows perfectly well he didn't catch it from her.
All I can say is, if syphilis is a judgment from heaven and the wicked, after this, God will have to think of something else.
.606 was very painful when injected into a muscle, but at least to begin with, few sufferers let that come between them and a possible cure for their dread disease. The treatment really was miraculous. Patients responded after one injection. Even in severe cases, the infection disappeared after only 1 week. For Ehrlich, it was a time of triumph. In 1908, he'd been awarded the Nobel Prize, jointly with Metchnikoff, for his work on immunology. And now his preparation 606, or Salvarsan as it was called, was being acclaimed everywhere. The pressure to make it freely available was immense. But though the small chemistry department of the Speer house was turned over completely to the manufacture of test samples, Ehrlich still thought it too soon to release it generally. With time, his anxiety about the precautions necessary in handling such a dangerous drug and the sheer load of production work began to tell both on him and his staff.
Ah, Dr. Berthan, I've had no reply to the block I sent you yesterday.
What block was that, sir?
Well, asking for an assurance that all the atoxyl derivatives you work on are protected from oxygen and methods used to ensure that.
I don't recall, sir.
Dr. Kahn, please be so good as to ask Cartwright to come here with a duplicate book. Do you deny receiving such a block?
No, sir.
Well, where is it?
I tore it up, sir. I'm afraid I thought it was insolent.
You did what? You're in charge here. I don't give directions for fun. Well, when Cartwright comes here with a copy of my block, see that this time you do not tear it up. Excuse me. And let me know this very day what you intend to do to ensure that henceforth my orders are carried out.
But we have many good results. Dr. Schreiber at Magdeburg insists we must publish.
Excuse me, Professor.
Yes,
Dr.
Conrad.
Herxheimer has just phoned from the city hospital. He wants you to go over there at once.
Here, hold these. My coat. Herr Professor!
Can you lift?
No.
Events were soon to confirm Ehrlich's worst fears. Within the first few months, accidents were reported which had resulted in gangrene, even paralysis.
Can I see the site of the injection, please?
You're sure sterilized water was used?
Yes, of course.
You're sure? I mean, there have been several cases of necrosis. Some doctors have used water from the tap.
Well, that's hardly likely here at the city hospital. No, as far as I know, all your instructions have been carried out to the letter.
As far as you know. Didn't you give the injection yourself?
Paul, we're giving 606 to every syphilis patient in the hospital. We must try and treat the prostitutes, too. I can't do everything myself.
If you all persist in this...
Ehrlich's response to these setbacks was immediate, an attempt to try to tighten still further his control over the use of Salvarsan.
Carter, Margaret, send me a block to ensure that from now on we only supply Salvarsan to doctors whose skill I can personally vouch for.
It's impossible, Paul. Already you're causing resentment by supplying to some and not to others.
If limiting supplies is going to cut down on accidents, then supplies must be limited.
Professor.
What is the card?
Telegram, Professor, from Vienna.
Oh, yes, thank you, thank you. Until chemical... This is unbelievable. Lost hearing after Salvarsan injection. What have they been doing here? Ask Dr. Bertheim to come here at once. Send a telegram to Professor Finger in Vienna. Request immediate telegraphic reply. What doses injected and how injection made. Hatter. Find out from which batch Professor Finger received his supply and who else was given it. Now hurry, please.
Thank you, Professor.
Send telegrams to all of them, requesting immediate report and results. Deafness, Marquardt. And Salvarsan. I'd forgotten just how narrow the acoustic canal is. If spirochetes lodged there were only partly destroyed, then still no word from Vienna.
No, Professor, but telegrams from everyone else who received supplies from that batch.
No ill effects reported.
Not in any I have opened so far.
Well, at least it can't be our fault. I was afraid it may possibly have oxidized here. Always ensure that supplies are packed in ice. Ah, my dear, such welcome news. All our telegrams confirm that no one but Dr. Finger's patient has gone deaf.
Paul, it's after midnight.
This is it from Vienna, Professor. He gave him only 0.1 grams.
Imbecile, the good-for-nothing imbeciles. Should have been 5 times as much. Too small a dose just acts as a stimulant. Why don't they trust me? Leave one spirochete alive in there, and when the others are gone, it gives it just more room to breed. Oh, well, no matter. Repeated doses will clear it. But we must warn everyone.
Paul, come home to bed.
Scenes like this were to continue for 3 more years. In 1910, the first year Salvarsan was in use, Ehrlich himself monitored every one of the 65,000 separate doses that left the institute.
They obtained distilled water direct from the pharmacies. So I sent...
His efforts bore fruit in that Salvarsan was hailed a great discovery and used throughout the world.
They were all contaminated. They placed the jars on the shelf and they draw the distilled water off.
But his other work suffered. The ideas he had for treatments for other diseases, against cancer, were tragically neglected. In spite of every precaution he took, he felt he was losing control.
Only fresh containers of distilled water must be used. Oh, yes, all right, dear, all right, don't fuss.
Thank you, Chris.
As Ehrlich's troubles with Salvarsan deepened, Almroth Wright in London now knew the value of his vaccine therapy. The preparation of the vaccine still went on far into the night, but by 1911, Wright had realized that his theory, unlike Ehrlich's, was based on fallacy. With bitter irony, he became known in later years as Sir Almost Wright. But if success was not to be his, nor was the kind of moral crisis which in 1913 threatened to discredit Ehrlich and Salvarsan completely.
My husband accused of making vast profits from the sale of Salvarsan. Who's behind this?
A man called Wassmann. He goes around dressed in monk's habit and distributes this paper, which he calls The Truth, around all the fashionable cafes of Frankfurt.
This piece here. I had evidence that many well-known doctors have accepted bribes from manufacturers for favourable reports. He must be mad.
Yes, I think very possibly he is. But that doesn't help us. This paper is seen by some influential and unsympathetic people.
You're not going to sue?
No, the hospital is.
Surely rubbish like this is best ignored.
I'm afraid not, Hedwig. There are doctors in Frankfurt who've made an extremely good living out of treating syphilis until Salvarsan arrived. They've been trying to discredit us for years.
And Paul? God knows, living with Paul's work on syphilis in this town has been hard enough. And Paul, look at him. He's taken every single criticism of Salvarsan as a personal attack. He's tried to refute every single one, you know that, and has done practically no new work for 3 years, and now this.
Yes, I know, but we have to answer dangerous criticism like this.
If you take this man to court, you'll achieve nothing, absolutely nothing.
Every one of my claims still stands. Every one of them. I shall accuse the doctors of this city, and in particular Herr Geheimrat Ehrlich. Also the magistrates of these courts.
Herr Wassmann, are you accusing the court of bias?
Yes. The magistrates have done nothing to inform themselves during previous hearings of my side of the case. Otherwise, how could they uphold such lies? Namely that Salvarsan is the best scientific treatment for syphilis. Eminent experts, among them Dr. Finger of Vienna, refer to it as lethal medicine. Also, the magistrates have upheld that no prostitute taken to the city hospital was given Salvarsan treatment against their will. Patently untrue.
Take care, Herr Wassmann.
I have evidence. Witnesses who will testify to what happened to them there. And of the ills that befell them while being treated there. They will tell you of gangrene and deafness and paralysis, all directly caused by treatment by Salvarsan.
You are making this accusation with firm evidence?
What I have said is true.
I hope so. Unfounded accusations
It is not unfounded.
Sit down, Herr Wassmann. We will now proceed to the evidence. Call the first witness.
And what happened then?
I was locked in a damn cellar without food for 5 days. It was what they called a starvation cure. You didn't get any food until you agreed to have the injection.
And was force ever used on you?
To get me into the cellar, you mean? Yes, it was.
And in the end, did you receive the injection?
Yes.
How did it affect you?
Well, first I had this terrible pain, and then I couldn't move my legs. I was paralyzed, and I stayed like that for 2 whole years.
Herr Professor, can we first deal with the evidence from Frau Feist? She described serious paralysis after the use of Salvarsan.
She certainly suffered paralysis, but it can by no means be attributed only to Salvarsan.
Both she and Mulhäuser described disturbances in their hearing.
My case notes contain no reference to that.
So you feel the complaint unjustified?
I believe it to be unjustified, yes.
But Frau Feist has described how she was brutally handled by hospital staff, and in particular, starved into submitting to treatment.
Yes, I heard that. It's absolute nonsense.
You're a damn liar! You know it's true!
We tell the truth, and he ought to as well.
If you people do not keep quiet, you will have to leave the court.
What about us girls that were locked in a cellar for 5 days without food if we refused to take it, eh?
If there is another outburst like this, I shall clear the court.
So what you are saying, Herr Professor, is that there was no brutality and no solitary confinement?
There was certainly no brutality. However, there were patients who were destructive, who broke china, for instance, and these we have confined not to a cellar, but to a cell with a reduced diet.
But never for more than 3 days, and always under the supervision of a nutritionist. I must stress that these patients could be extremely violent, and on one occasion the doctors had been attacked directly.
Why? Why were the doctors attacked, Professor Herxheimer? Have you lost your memory?
I must insist, Dr. Levy, that you do not offend...
I had no idea, truly.
Sir,
I had no idea.
Ehrlich was opposed to legal action against Wassmann, but he was called as a witness.
Can we go back over the history of Salvarsan for a moment, Herr Geheimrat, and the way in which it has been employed on humans? Is it true that the first injections were given intramuscularly?
Yes. Will the witness speak up, please?
Yes.
Why then subsequently did you recommend it to be done intravenously?
To avoid pain and prevent the possibility of nerve damage.
Which can cause paralysis?
Yes.
And gangrene, as the defendant suggested.
Yes.
Had that happened?
On certain occasions.
How many occasions?
At this moment, I can't recall.
Really? But enough, at any rate, to recommend as an alternative a method of injection which is more dangerous to use than intramuscular injection, namely the intravenous method.
From that comment, it's quite clear you don't understand the nature of clinical tests. Of course there'll be risks. There are always risks. And we did everything possible to eliminate them. So that in the end, the benefits by far outweigh the problems.
Financial benefits?
What was that, Herr Wassmann?
No matter.
Tell me, Herr Geheimrat, is it not true that you publicly accused colleagues of malpractice when they discovered that Salvarsan had bad side effects?
Sir, I must ask that this question is withdrawn. The Council is vicariously seeking to inject into these complex debates conflict of a kind that never existed.
Sir, I am seeking solely to determine the nature of the risk involved in using such modified poisons as Salvarsan.
The line of questioning can continue.
Then I must point out something quite clearly. I have censured only those that created problems by ignoring instructions and by carelessness.
Dr. Finger, for instance.
In his case, he did not trust the dose level and reduced it to 1/5 of the recommended dose. All his troubles stem from that.
You should not allow this. He is slurring the reputation of a real expert who is not here to defend himself.
Herr Wassmann, this is the last warning I shall give you. Now, will you keep quiet?
He is to blame for this whole shameful affair, and he's trying to pass it off onto other people.
Herr Wassmann, you have repeatedly...
That man is a murderer!
You have repeatedly ignored my warnings, so I will now charge you with contempt of court. Take him down.
All right, I'm going. I'm going. The government is behind this whole business. It's a dirty plot. The corrupt bastards. The Jewish murderer.
Silence in court.
To continue, Herr Geheimrat. Are you listening? Did you not, in fact, threaten these colleagues with court action?
No. I did not. And never would have done. Throughout the preparation for this case, I resisted their progress because I feared what a court might make of complex issues of scientific judgment. Now, having seen the way science has been reduced and degraded here today, how the perspectives of our work has been warped and twisted, my very worst fears have been realized.
In the end, judgment went against Wassmann and he was jailed for a year. Not for libel, however, but for contempt.
Shame of it. I'd no idea.
It's not a perfect world, Paul. Something new like this is bound to cause jealousy and controversy.
If only I could have kept control of it.
Ehrlich was never the same man again. He'd been profoundly disturbed by the reactions to his discoveries and by the way his work had been misrepresented. His health also was failing. The effect of 25 cigars a day, a diet of mineral water and occasional hurried meals, coupled with the worry about Salverson, had all taken their toll. He'd developed a serious heart condition. In 1914, on the outbreak of war, Ehrlich's institute was taken over by the army, but Ehrlich was left undisturbed and continued to potter about his old laboratory.
Excuse me, sir.
The end of his work marked the end of an era, a mere 65 years, in which, due to the efforts of men like Pasteur, Koch and Ehrlich, the whole scientific basis for curing infectious diseases had been established. Ehrlich died in 1915, and it wasn't till 13 years later that the next major step was taken to extend his work. Ironically, it was taken at St. Mary's Hospital in Sir Almroth Wright's department by a Scots doctor, Alexander Fleming. In 1928, in the small laboratory behind this second-floor window, he rediscovered the chemotherapeutic action of a common mold, penicillin, and opened the way to the magic bullets we know today, antibiotics.